Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I'm so happy that you are here. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing Luke Woodham. In 1997, 16-year-old Luke murdered his mother before stealing her car, driving to his high school, this was Pearl High School, with a gun and going in and opening fire. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before we get into the details of today's case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Aura. Now, I want to start this off with a question for you, okay? And the question for you is this. Have you ever Googled your name or the name of somebody you love and been surprised to see how much of yours or their private information was available on one of those public listing sites? Because when I tell you, it is far more common than you may think for your personal and private information to get in the hands of people that you just don't want to have it. And that's because there are these things out there called data brokers who take your information and sell it to people like spammers and robocallers. You know how, okay, do you get those texts sometimes that like seem like they could be legit, but they also seem a little bit fishy and they're coming from a number that you don't know and you're like, this feels like a scam? I am not down with that sickness. I value my privacy and I value your privacy. And that's why I want to introduce you to Aura. Now, did you know that data brokers are legally required to remove your information if you ask them to? It sounds great, right? Except they make it super difficult for you to do it. They make it hard for you to figure out which of the pesky data brokers even have your information. And that's one of the ways in which Aura comes in. They figure out which data brokers have your information and they submit the opt-out request on your behalf. They do the work so that you do not have to. When I first signed up for Aura, one of the very first things I did is I went to the data broker opt-out section on their website because I was just kind of curious as to how many data brokers could have my information. And it turns out like 30. And Aura had already submitted the opt-out request on my behalf. Thank you, Aura. They also check and see if your information has been leaked on the dark web. And if you know, you know. No one wants their information leaked on the dark web. And they go online. They check to see if the passwords you use online for websites like your banking are secure. And those right there are just a couple of things that Aura does to keep you and yours safe from online threats that you just simply cannot see. Through just the Aura app that's super easy to set up, you can get things like parental controls, which I'm getting closer and closer to needing, and it's actually kind of rude, antivirus, VPN, password management, identity theft insurance, and more. And you get it all in one place. There's no need for several different apps, and you get it all at one affordable price. Now listen, it sounds like a great deal to me, but I'm not your mom. I can't tell you what to do. What I can tell you is I'm not going to leave me and my family vulnerable to breaches and brokers. And if you don't want that to happen to you either, you can click the link in my description box, which is aura.com/Bratterstein, to get 2 weeks free through my link. And that is enough time in case you're curious for Aura to look and see if your personal data has been exposed. So if all of that sounds as good to you as it does to me, make sure to go to aura.com/Bratterstein to let them know that I'm the one that sent you and get a 14-day free trial and see if your personal and private information has been leaked online. And if it has, let Aura help you put a stop to it today. Now, I just want to say a big thank you to Aura for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Aura that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock. Don't ever change. Now, with all of that said, let's go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video is on a case that somehow I had never heard of, and it actually seems crazy to me now that I have looked into it because it seems like the type of thing that I would have heard of. But when I was growing up, the only school shootings I really heard about were Columbine and Sandy Hook, right? These two horrible events that I always heard whispers of throughout my years growing up. But years before either of those things happened, there was the 1997 Pearl High School shootings. And this was a case that completely shocked and traumatized the small community of Pearl for many reasons. And one of the things is that it was just so layered. Like, for example, the chief of police, this was William Slade, I believe. He made a statement where he was talking about why he thought these horrible crimes were committed when he said, quote, "If you talk to town officials, they'll tell you it might be a little bit of Satanism, a little bit of reading into Hitler, a little bit of boy-girl romance problems, of anger at parents and at classmates." So with that, today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things that you do not have to, and at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case, but of course I want you to answer once you have something to go on. And the question of the day is this. Do you think that Luke is the only person who should have been convicted for these murders? Or do you think that other people should have been convicted for their possible involvement? That's what I'll say to not give too much information away right off the beginning. But let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after you have some information to go on, of course. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of Luke Woodham, the murder of his mother, Mary Ann Woodham, and the Pearl High School shooting that resulted in the deaths of 2 teenage girls. This was 17-year-old Lydia Dew and 16-year-old Christina Menefee, Luke's ex-girlfriend. Our story today is going to begin on October 1st, 1997, and we are in Pearl. And Pearl is a small town that is near the state capital of Jackson in Mississippi. Pearl at this time was a town of just over 20,000 people in the heart of the Bible Belt with literally like 37 churches, mostly Baptist, and Pearl was nestled along 4 transportation arteries in Mississippi. This was Interstate 55, Interstate 20, and U.S. Highways 80 and 49. So we're in Pearl, and specifically we're at Pearl High School, and it's just about 8 a.m. when the assistant band director, this was a guy named Jeff, he's working the commons area of the school. Basically, the commons was like a large open area where all the kids would hang out and spend time before, the bell rang and they all had to go to class. And Jeff was there, and he was in charge of just like watching the kids and making sure they didn't get into anything, getting into any trouble, make sure no fights broke out, things like that. And he said that this was like a tall order considering he was watching like 300 to 400 kids that morning. So Jeff's there, he's looking around, he's watching all the kids, he's monitoring the situation when he sees a kid enter the doors of the commons. And this kid was a high school junior named Luke Woodham. And normally Luke wouldn't have stood out to him in any way, like him coming in the door wouldn't have been weird or it wouldn't have been noteworthy. But Jeff was like, oh, that's the second time he's come in this morning. He had already come in once, left, and come in again. And on top of that, Luke was dressed kind of strangely. He was wearing this long blue coat. And Jeff thought to himself, like, that's weird. It's like a little chilly out, but it's forecasted to be kind of warm today. So it's weird that he'd be wearing this coat, but he kind of put it out of his mind and thought to himself, like, it's the 90s of it all. Perhaps he is dabbling in the grunge styling, obviously. Anyways, at 8:06 a.m., all of a sudden a gunshot rang out in the commons. And I feel like in this day and age, if we were to hear something like that in a public space, we would immediately know what was happening because mass shootings happen so often. It's actually it is actually horrific how often they happen. But in the 90s, it wasn't as prevalent. And that's not to say that it didn't happen at all, that school shootings weren't a thing in the 90s, because there had definitely been school shootings before this. Apparently, the first documented school shooting was actually in the 1700s. I think it was 1764, which seems insane to me. And then every year and then every decade since then, there's been progressively more, with several actually happening in the 80s and several happening in the 90s prior to this. But what I'm trying to say here is that the mindset around school shootings wasn't what it is now. It wasn't happening so frequently that it felt like it was happening every single day. And back in the 90s, people didn't have, a little bit of everything all of the time via their cell phone and the internet just in their pocket, like all day, every day. So when Jeff heard this gunshot ring out, he thought that one of the kids in ROTC had accidentally fired their weapon, which to me, I was like, I didn't realize the ROTC had loaded weapons. Like, I remember the ROTC. I actually, for like the very shortest period of time, was in ROTC because I was like 2 years of ROTC or 4 years of PE for my lazy, large ass. I'm going to do ROTC. Quickly realized that was not for me. But I don't remember loaded guns is my point. But from what I read an article about this. They would keep loaded weapons that they would shoot off at football games. So this is what went through his head when he heard that gunshot. So he hears this, he starts scanning the commons to kind of find the origin of the sound, and that's when he realized what was going on. He saw Luke take a gun, aim it, and shoot 16-year-old Christina Menefee, a girl that Luke claimed to love more than anything else in the world, in the neck. And as soon as he realized what was going on, as soon as Jeff realized what was happening, he started screaming. He started screaming for anyone and everyone that would listen to get out of there, to run, to protect themselves. And of course, it was immediately mayhem. And unfortunately, 17-year-old Lydia Dew, who was standing next to Christina, tried to run, but Luke took his rifle, aimed it at her back, and fired. From there, Luke just started firing at random into the crowd of kids, and 7 other kids ended up being hit with bullets, whether it be from direct fire or from ricochet from the bullets hitting the ground, because most of the bullets that Luke fired hit the ground and, sent projectiles out because he was inexperienced at using a gun, but that didn't mean that the damage he inflicted wasn't horrific. Like, one student who witnessed what happened said that there were people laying everywhere bleeding, and he said specifically of this quote, "Everybody looked dead." So after firing multiple shots into the crowd, Luke's gun jammed, and he did mess with it for a second to try to fix it so he could continue shooting. But when he realized that wasn't going to be a possibility, at least not fast enough for his liking, he just decided to flee, and he took off leaving the school, heading for his mom's car that was parked nearby. Now, at the same time that Luke was trying to flee, another school official, this was the then assistant principal, and his name was Joel. He was at his truck and he was getting his gun. He had a .45 Colt automatic, and it's basically as soon as he realized that there was an active shooter on campus, he took off to his car because he was going to do what he had to do to protect his students. So he sees Luke coming out of the commons doors and he screams for him to stop, but Luke doesn't listen to him. Luke walks to his mother's white Chevy, gets inside, and closes the door. And as soon as Luke closed the door, this kind of snapped Joel into, is it Joel or Joel? Ooh, it's Joel. I'm going to go with Joel, but I could be mistaken there, and I'm just now realizing it. But he snaps into action because he thinks of what the consequences could be if Luke was to leave. And that's because I believe there were 2 schools nearby, 2 additional schools, and one of them was Pearl Elementary School. And this is where Joel's son went to school. So with that, Joel took off, and luckily he was able to get ahead of Luke because Luke got stuck behind another car. So Luke goes to drive around this other car, and he's confronted with Joel standing in the middle of the road with a gun just pointed at him. And he, upon seeing this, panics. He's a 16-year-old kid. He panics. He tries to swerve. He ends up going into the grass, and he loses traction because he had his emergency brake on. And his car skids to a stop near the edge of the road, basically. Joel then approached Luke's car and told him not to move or he would shoot. He then got Luke out of the car and got him laying down on the ground. And once he was subdued and he had a gun pointed at him where he couldn't do anything, he asked him, "Why are you killing my kids?" And Luke responded with, quote, "The world has wronged me and I couldn't take it anymore." And to this, Joel then responded, quote, "Wait till you get to Parchment Penitentiary," which is the Mississippi State Penitentiary, and it's a maximum security prison. About 10 minutes after the first shot was fired, it was over. Luke had been arrested, and when he was arrested, he was found with a pocket full of unused bullets and a large cut on his palm. And when he was asked how he got this cut, he hesitated for a moment before calmly and proudly saying, quote, "Killing my mom. She's probably dead by now." So with that, let's talk about Luke and let's talk about how we got here. Luke Timms Woodham was born February 5th, 1981, to parents John, he was an auditor, and Mary Ann, she was a receptionist. He was one of 2 children with an older brother also named John. He was actually John the third, and Pops was John the second. And Luke's brother was actually 8 years older than him. They had a pretty significant age gap. When Luke was younger, he was said to be this adorable, sweet kid with this active imagination. He was said to be a skilled artist, and he loved books. He was an avid reader. He had a big love of books, and this is something that stuck with him as he got older, or rather the love of books is what stuck with him as he got older. Maybe he was also a skilled artist. I can't say. I can say he probably wasn't sweet, or we wouldn't be talking about him today, but he was also a very intelligent kid. He loved to learn. It's just as he got older, the things he loved to learn about were a bit darker. But prior to that, prior to getting involved in dark things, he was just thought to be a quiet and well-behaved kid, or well-behaved kid. We'll get into it. There were some things. He didn't have any disciplinary problems is what I mean when I say that. And he was just a little bit nerdy. He had thick glasses. He had kind of a weird haircut. He dressed in, quote, unstylish clothing. And, he was overweight. And if you know, kids can be such dicks. And kids who knew him were said to be kind of dicks to him. They teased him. They made his high school experience unpleasant. They called him, nerdy and chunky and tubby, like just shithead little things that shithead kids do. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that we've heard this story a million times. And if you grew up as an overweight kid, you've heard it yourself, I'm sure. And this attitude towards him from the other kids his age made it so he just kind of isolated himself. He was the type of kid who would sit at the front of the bus and talk to the bus driver. He would talk about his favorite shows, particularly Gilligan's Island was one that he loved. And if it was a hot day, he would express concern over his dog Sparkles, thinking that his dog needed a haircut or more water because it was hot outside. And what was most notable about this is that he was always sitting up front and talking to the bus driver about this because he didn't seem to have any friends his age that he could talk to. Which, in this case is unfortunate because he didn't really seem like he had family he could talk to either. Luke's parents were divorced, but even prior to the divorce, the only memories that Luke seemed to have, or rather the only memories that he expressed or has stated to people after his arrest, was memories of his brother picking on him and his parents just fighting. He and his brother just didn't seem to get along. As I said in the beginning, they had 8 years between them. They weren't close in age at all. They didn't really have anything in common. And whenever his brother was home, which wasn't very much, especially in Luke's teenage years, he would just pick on him. And it got so bad that in one altercation, Luke, after it all went down, said that he wished that he was dead, but nobody in his family, in his opinion, seemed to care. And then there was his parents fighting. He said that his parents screaming terrified him, but said that when they weren't fighting and they weren't yelling, it wasn't much better. His father, who did end up leaving the family and basically just disappearing altogether, prior to that was just said to be kind of aloof. And his mother, who he stayed with after the divorce, this was Mary Ann, she was said to be overprotective and overbearing, but at the same time, Luke said that she seemed sort of disengaged from motherhood. According to Luke, he and his mother had a complicated relationship. He said that he loved her, but he also hated her. Luke said that after she had divorced his dad, she became even more controlling and more overbearing than she used to be. And his brother, John, the older brother who he fought with so much, basically just started staying away from home as much as possible at that point because of the way his mother was, which left Luke to be the one person there for her to focus all of her energy on. He was given more chores. He was micromanaged. According to him, his mom controlled what he did, who he hung out with, what he wore, how he cut his hair, what he ate, and how much. And an example that he gave about this, which is pretty traumatizing, is that in one instance, he had had a plate of food and didn't finish it and scraped it off into the trash. And he said that in response to this, she got the food from the trash and made him eat it, which I will admit is a lot. He said there was also another instance where she did something that's sort of similar, I guess, in its consumption. I don't know how else to word that, but basically he said that he had been stealing cigarettes from his mom, which I don't know about you, but as a teenager, I definitely did that too. And he said that in response to this, his mother was pissed and she made him smoke 2 packs of cigarettes back to back, which caused him to throw up. She did very much like a smoke up Johnny type of situation. Luke said that his room was never clean enough. He said his mother would throw away his toys or belongings and she put them in the trash and she wouldn't let him get them out. And you may notice that while I'm telling this portion of the story and other things that Luke says, I'm saying Luke says or according to Luke, and that's because so often it was just Luke and his mother, Mary Ann. So I don't want all the things that I'm saying here and all the things that Luke said to be memorialized as fact because, we can't prove a lot of it and I don't want... Mary Ann's not here to defend herself, right? She's not here to defend herself because her accuser murdered her. Luke just seemed to have a lot of resentment towards his mother, who, she worked multiple jobs, and she was a single lady who would go out on dates and go out with friends, often leaving Luke home alone. And he actually said that, she sort of blamed him for the fact that she was single, blamed him for the divorce from his father and for her bad relationship with Luke's older brother. But according to Luke, Mary Ann never loved him. This is what he says. He says his mother never loved him and that she was very verbally abusive to him. He said that she would call him fat or tell him that he was never going to amount to anything. But then at the same time, she would drive him to school every morning and make sure that he would give her a kiss on the cheek before he got out of the car. And of course, this was something that did not help him with his status and the hierarchy of high school because kids were already teasing him, and then they see him kiss his mother, and then it became a whole thing. I guess in one instance, he even, like, a kid made an incest joke because kids do be being kids, little shits. And Luke got into a physical altercation with him where he had to be pulled away physically. So things weren't going well for Luke, right? He's unhappy. He's resentful. He suffered with depression for years, even reportedly trying to take his own life more than once. And the kid who had once loved school, like taken his intelligence and education so seriously, thought he was smarter than everybody else, thought he was so smart that anytime he got smarter or his mother liked him less because he could outsmart her, he started to suffer in school. His grades dipped to the point that he had to repeat the 9th grade. And when he was doing his assignments, which he wasn't doing very much, obviously, if he had to repeat the 9th grade, the work he was turning in was a bit darker. For example, in a class where he had to do a writing assignment where the writing prompt was describing what you would do if you were able to be a teacher for the day, Luke wrote that he would, quote, go crazy and kill all the other teachers. After this, he would, quote, slowly and very painfully torture all of the principals to death. And the last sentence of the assignment read, quote, I would get a gun and blow my brains out all over the doggone room and leave my house to Luke Woodham. And what's crazy about this particular part to me is that Luke turned this assignment in to his teacher. Okay, here. Read this. And nothing came of it. And I know that I'm looking at the situation through a 2025. Wow, I'm so fucking old. But I know I'm looking at this through a 2025 lens where like mass shootings are such a common thing and we see it all the time. But I feel like if I was to read this, I would immediately be concerned about like what this kid was going to go on to do, especially because like Luke didn't really seem to have anything that was tethering him to humanity. Well, except for a time when he had Christina. So 16-year-old Christina Menefee was described by her daughter as a, quote, sweet young girl, very, very outgoing, very bright, very vibrant, bubbly, and tender-hearted. And her tender heart seemed to be what warmed her up to Luke Woodham, a boy who, by all accounts, wasn't somebody who most girls were very interested in. Basically, Christina had seen Luke and had a soft spot for him, right? She like goes up to him when he's sitting alone, eating lunch. She sits with him. She talks to him. They start spending more and more time together. And within no time, Christina became like the only girl in Luke's world. And initially this was like a little off-putting for her because in her mind, she had kind of seen him as more of like a brother-sister situation, a brother-sister relationship. But with time, with them spending time together, he confessed his love to her. He said that like she was it. And he even said about her, quote, I actually had someone to love and someone who loved me for the first time in my life. And he wrote her a letter and told her like his life began when he met her. But the thing is, Luke sort of fumbled the bag with Christina because like when they first started hanging out and spending time together, things went really well. Like Christina brought him home to meet her father. Her dad's name was Bob, and Bob met all the boys that Christina was interested in. She brought him. They met. Bob seemed to like him. He said he was like a quiet, shy, respectful kid. There was nothing about him that made alarm bells go off. He was even the kind of kid who was like, yes, sir. He only referred to him as sir. He referred to him as sir so much that Bob like jokingly told him like, you could stop with the sir thing. Like, it's fine. But, you know, even though Luke did seem like a sweet and like shy and like well-mannered kid, there were some things about him that were unique, things that stood out a little bit. And one of the things that was the most unique and notable was that anytime Luke and Christina were to go on a date together, Mary Ann would accompany them. Like she would come with them on the dates. If they went to McDonald's, if they went to the movies, if they just went back to like Christina's house to spend time with each other, Mary Ann would be there. And that was a little bit weird. They thought, oh, maybe this is like a Southern thing. Like, oh, wait, Southern? They just thought it was a little bit strange, right? But they didn't think it was super strange. It was just notable. And I guess like at one point, like Luke didn't seem to like this. That's what I'm getting at. Luke didn't seem to like this. And at one point, like they were hanging out. Him and Christina are sitting on a love seat. He takes her hand and his mom just kind of looks at them and is like, you two sitting closer together? And Luke responded like, we're fine, Mom. And it was very clear that he was frustrated. And Bob said, like Bob was there and remembers the interaction and said that it was clear there was some animosity between the two of them. Now, even if you were to take the animosity out of the picture, and that wasn't there at all to consider, Christina still wasn't super into the relationship. She did find the thing with Mary Ann to be weird. She found it a little bit off-putting. She thought that Mary Ann was a bit possessive and a bit controlling, but what she found from spending more time with Luke is that he was kind of the same, because within no time, Luke did get controlling and possessive over Christina. He didn't want her to spend any time with other friends. He wanted her all to himself. And Christina was described by her father as a girl who had friends and friends galore. Like, she was very popular. She was very well liked. So this wasn't really working for her. So within no time, Christina actually went to her dad and she told her dad, like, listen, I don't want to date Luke anymore, but I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how to let him down easy. And her dad told her, like, just be straight up with him, be very honest and very clear with him. Let him know that it's nothing that he did wrong, and tell him that the two of you can still be friends. And, you know, she did that, and Luke took it hard at first. It was clear to Bob. Bob was watching it as a dad on the outside, and he could see that, like, Luke cared about Christina far more than Christina cared about Luke, and he was a little bit infatuated with her. And after the breakup, it did take him some time to seemingly get over it. Like, he'd call her house for a couple of weeks after that, but eventually he did stop, and they didn't hear from him for a while. Then they finally did hear from him again, and this was about 3 weeks before Christina was murdered, and he called her up and he asked her out, but she politely declined, saying she wasn't very interested in having a relationship with anybody at that time. But what Christina didn't know is that even though it seemed like Luke had let it go because he stopped calling her house and it wasn't, you know, he wasn't being outwardly obsessed, he hadn't let it go. Luke said that the breakup with Christina affected him very seriously. He took it so hard, and he said specifically of this quote, "I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, I didn't want to live." He said that the breakup had destroyed him, and he had even put a gun in his mouth because he didn't want to be alive. And listen, that's horrible, okay? Because if you were to take this isolated incident and he didn't kill anybody, like, that's sad. That's sad for a 16-year-old kid to feel that strongly about that. But I need to mention something, because I think it is worth mentioning, because when we talk about this, it sounds like they dated for a while, right? For him to care so much and them to, like, go on their dates. But no, dude, they went on like 4 or 5 dates over, I think it was a 3-week period, a year before this happened, like the September before the shooting. Okay. They went out for less than a month, and then she ended it, and that was it. But still, he was having a hard time. And listen, I know how intense young love can be. Okay. When I was 16 years old, I was an emo 16-year-old. Okay. So I loved hard. And the world revolved around the person I loved at that time. And so I get it. But still, his response to what happened here seems to be a little bit disproportionate for what actually happened. You know what I mean? Which, you know, could be argued that many 16-year-olds react higher emotionally than the situation merits. Which, all of that, already not good. Everything we've discussed, already not good. But then Luke makes a friend, or Luke makes some friends. And for a kid that didn't have friends, you would think this would be great. But these kids may or may not have made the situation worse by perhaps inviting him into a satanic cult. But how much legitimacy to whether or not this cult really existed and how much this situation influenced Luke is a matter of opinion. Which I would love to hear yours once you know all about it. So, early 1997, okay? Luke gets a job working as a pizza delivery driver, right? He's working in a pizza shop. He's doing his thing. He's killing it. He's crushing the game. They're even thinking about making him a manager. He's doing very well. And it's while working there that he meets a friend named Donald. And Donald's like, hey, you know, you're cool. I like you. Why don't you come hang out with me and my friends? We hang out. We play role-playing games. I think you'd love it. I think you'd be a good fit. So this was a group of, quote, misfits that were led by an older boy. This is a boy that was a couple years older than Luke, and this was a guy named Grant Boyette. And Grant reportedly may also have been bullied, and I do believe that, because even in the way he's described after all this happened, okay, in the media, they said he was, quote, painfully thin with bony arms, severe cheekbones, and sunken eye sockets. So even the media was kind of harshing his mellow. You know what I mean? Like, they were being a little, I mean, Do you need to be nice to somebody who does bad things? It's gray. It's 50 shades of gray. Now, Grant seems to be a divisive guy, right? He was bullied, they say, but they also say he had like a good reputation, that he came from a good family, that his parents were super active members of their community, and he was like a choir boy. He went to church and he was one with God. But some people saw him that way, and then some people saw him totally different. Some people saw him as a guy with a bad temper who would grab you by the throat if you were to make him angry. These same people say he was fascinated with Nietzsche and Hitler, saying that he admired the way Hitler was able to influence people, which is like, anyone who admires Hitler, I find that personally to be very strange. Okay, I find that to be odd, personally. You don't have to agree, I guess, but I feel like most of us probably will. But anyways, moving on. The fact that Grant admired that quality of Hitler does seem to make sense to me, because it seems like that's kind of what Grant was personally aiming for. A childhood friend of his called him a Machiavellian. God, I cannot say this word. I'll put it on the screen. But this is someone who is manipulative, cunning, and will do anything to gain power. So Grant, who called himself father, by the way, was the leader of this little group, and this group called themselves the Croth. And the name the Croth was a name that he said was given to him by his real father, Satan. Because you'll find that Grant seemed to like Satan, like that was his guy. And it's worth mentioning that I say that this group called themselves the Croth, but it seems that it was more like Grant and a few select members of this group that kind of entertained that idea, or you can let me know your opinion on whether or not they were all into it or not. But basically, some of them were like, yeah, the Croth, like we called ourselves that's cool. And some of them were like, listen, I was just there to chill. I was a teenager and I was going there to play role-playing games and talk about philosophy and listen to quote hard rock from the 90s. But in Grant's mind, this was a very serious group. And once you were in this group, you were in this group for life, bro, because you knew too much. So if you tried to leave, you had to die, which I will say is very dramatic. Now, according to Luke, when he first started hanging out with this group and hanging out with Grant, he didn't know what it was all about. He didn't know about the Croth. He didn't know about the Nazi shit. He didn't know about the Satanism. He just wanted friends. He just wanted to be accepted. And at first it seemed like things were going well for him and this group of friends, because before this, he like flunked out of 9th grade, but now he was back to reading. He started reading Aristotle and Plato and Dostoevsky, and then he started praying to Satan, which, what a jump, am I right? But basically, these kids would meet up at Luke's house all the time once he was in the group, because Luke's mom often wasn't home, so they could have the place to themselves. And they would get there. They would hang out. They would listen to music. They would play the games that I already mentioned. And some of them would do satanic rituals. I guess Grant owned the book, the Necronomicon, which isn't that the book from Evil Dead? All the Evil Deads. Isn't that like the book that you don't read, the Book of Human Skin? It's a version of that, I believe. It was called the Book of the Dead, and it was filled with like myths and rituals. And Luke said that he believed that it was true, that the magic and spells from this book were real, because he said that he had seen it work with his own eyes. He said that he believed him when Grant told him that Satan had specifically chosen him to be in their group because he was destined to do great things. And supposedly it wasn't just Luke who believed in these demons. There were other kids that were part of the Croth kids, is what I'm going to call them, Croth kids, who believed that Grant could summon demons, and said that they believed that Luke was like the perfect target for Grant to like show these demons to, because Luke was evil-minded. Now, these kids didn't only talk about the devil and satanic worship and all that. They also talked about committing murders. And according to Luke, they were specifically mostly talking about targeting their school in a variety of different ways, from fires to napalm bombs, napalm bombs. They were going to do this and then cut the power to the school. And then when all the kids came out running because something was going on, they were going to shoot them. And then it morphs to shooting kids when the tardy bell ring? Yeah. The bell that tells you that you're tardy, all the kids that were still outside, they were going to shoot people then. And Grant would often, according to Luke and others, boast about how he had access to assault rifles. And then the plan morphed again. And according to Luke, the assassin, which was him, was to go to Pearl High School, open fire, shoot a bunch of people, and then leave and head to nearby Pearl Junior High and do the same thing. After Luke did that, the Croth kids were supposed to meet up in nearby Jackson before driving to New Orleans, heading into Mexico, and then catching a boat to Cuba. And then they'd just be in the wind, trays in the wind. So that's what was going on. That's what Luke had been talking about. That's the kind of information that Luke had been consuming in the months leading up to these murders. And the day before the murders took place, Luke got to a place where he said he just felt numb. He said he didn't care about anything. He didn't want anything. All he knew is that he needed to go to that school and shoot it up. And all he needed to do this was his mother's car. The night before the murders, Luke had even called up one of his friends that were in the Croth, like one of the Croth kids, and had whispered when he was talking because Mary Ann was in the house. And he whispered to his friend that he was going to kill his mother the next morning and said that his plan was to stab her to death. To this friend, Luke sounded calm. He sounded in control. And so when he went to bed that night, he kind of put out of his mind what Luke said because he didn't believe he would actually do it. They were friends. They had spent time together. He had had sleepovers at Luke's house, so he didn't think that Luke was actually capable of doing something like that. But he was wrong. At this point, by the time they're talking on the phone, Luke had already started taking steps towards committing this crime. He had gone into his mother's room. He had removed the landline from her bedroom and hid it so that the next morning she couldn't call 911. That next morning, Luke was up early. He had set an alarm for 5 a.m. so that he could be up before his mother because he wanted to kill her while she was in her bed. So he heads down the hallway and is surprised to see that his mother is there because she herself had gotten up early to go for a jog. Okay, at that moment, Luke was holding a baseball bat. So he took this baseball bat and he attacked his mother, hitting her over and over in the face. He hit her cheekbone, he hit below one of her eyes, and he ended up hitting her in the jaw, breaking it. Somehow, though, Mary Ann was able to get away from Luke. She ran, she went into her room, and she locked the door to try to save herself, but Luke broke it down. Once in the room, the two ended up in her bed where Luke, who also had an old hickory butcher knife with him, stabbed her over and over again. And altogether, she suffered 7 stab wounds and 11 slash wounds. Many of these slash wounds were actually to her fingers and her palms from when she had them up trying to protect herself, trying to defend herself. And when they looked at her body during her autopsy, they found that out of the 7 stab wounds, 3 of them would have been fatal because one hit her right lung, one hit her left lung, and one hit her heart. After killing his mother, he took a pillow and he put it over her face. And this is something that a lot of experts see in killers who feel some sort of remorse. And then he just left the room. At some point, he went into his room and he left several items on his bed that were found later. There was the bloody knife, there was the baseball bat, there was like a camo gun cover, and a Marilyn Manson CD. He said at this point he knew what he was going to do and he knew how it was going to play out. He was absolutely convinced that he was going to die in a shootout with police. So he sat down and he wrote his last will and testament, something that later the media would call his manifesto. And after writing this, he made a phone call. He actually called Grant. He was talking to Grant on the phone. And while talking to Grant on the phone, his friend that he had talked to the night before actually called. And Luke clicked over to talk to this friend. And this friend was calling to see if Luke had actually gone through with his plan. And Luke started to cry and said, yes, I did. I killed my mother. After getting off the phone, Grant went to the attic and grabbed his father's rifle. And he left in his mother's car. And neighbors remember seeing him leave and being surprised because first they see him loading stuff into his mom's car. And then they see him driving erratically out of the driveway, even knocking down a small tree. And it's because this guy didn't know how to drive. And they said normally Mary Ann would get in the car with Luke at 7 a.m. to take him to school. But as we know, she was not alive to be able to do this that day. So Luke gets to the school, and less than a minute before the shooting began, he walks up to a friend of his that was part of this Croth kids group, right? And this was a kid named Justin Sledge, who is somebody that we're going to talk about a little bit more later. But he walks up to Justin and he hands him this last will and testament / manifesto and tells him to give it to Grant, okay? And then Justin, in realizing what was about to happen, leaves, and I believe he headed to the library, where he hid while Luke killed 2 kids and wounded 7 more. Just after 8 a.m., as the buses arrived to Pearl High School, the first shot rang out. And this first shot hit 16-year-old Christina Menefee in the lower neck, killing her instantly. 17-year-old Lydia Dew was standing next to Christina, and she did try and run. But when she did, Luke took the rifle, aimed it in her back, and shot her. And later he said he didn't know why he shot her, because to him, Lydia was, quote, a ray of happiness, sunshine, and joy. But still, he shot her. And what's so sad here is Lydia didn't die right away. She laid there conscious for a while, even talking to a teacher who came to her aid. From there, several other students were shot or hit by shrapnel. Okay, and this is because I mentioned in the beginning, he was shooting, bullets were hitting the ground. They were fragmenting off and hitting people. A girl named Stephanie, for example, she was shot in the hip and it shattered her hip, and it took like several surgeries and, what is it called? In therapy, like physical therapy to recover. A boy named Jerry was shot in the leg while he tried to protect his girlfriend. And what's super weird about the fact that Jerry got shot, or the aftermath, is that after he shot Jerry, Luke walked up to him, like bleeding on the ground, and apologized to him. He said to him, quote, "Oh, Jerry, I'm sorry. I didn't recognize you." And I guess Luke thought that Jerry was this kid named Kyle, and Kyle was the mayor's son, and he wanted to kill the mayor's son to add some shock value to what he was doing. And the whole thing's just weird because I guess Jerry's not the only kid that Luke apologized to. There was this kid named Casey who lived through this situation and said that after Luke was done shooting, he apologized. He said that he was sorry, that he was just shooting at random. He wasn't shooting at anybody in particular. Though it did seem like jealousy and anger towards Christina was definitely a motivator, considering she was the first person he shot. Moving on, a kid named Alan, who reportedly was one of the kids who bullied Luke, was shot. He had been running away to get away from Luke, and he tripped and he fell. And Luke walked up to him while he was laying on the ground and shot him several times in the back. Reportedly, he missed this kid's vertebrae by like less than an inch, I think, and he was left paralyzed for months after this happened. It was just a madhouse, right? Like, everybody was seeing this happen. Everybody was freaking out. One 10th grader said that he literally saw Luke pull out the gun, walk right up to Christina, and shoot her without any hesitation. And he said specifically of this quote, "Everything got real quiet and started moving in slow motion. I saw him walk over and shoot the second girl, and everyone started running." He said it was like a horror movie. Another kid, this was a girl named Kimberly, said that Luke had the same blank expression on his face the entire time. Even after he shot somebody, even after he was able to look around and see that people were on the ground bleeding everywhere, he had the same blank expression. And another kid named Nathan just said straight up, like, everyone looked dead. So as I said in the beginning, Luke fired multiple shots and eventually his gun jammed. He took several minutes, or not several minutes, like a little bit of time trying to fix the gun, was unable to, and so tried to leave the school, tried to book it. As I said in the beginning of this video, also the assistant principal, this was Joel Myrick, who was an Army reservist and National Guard commander, and was my age, by the way, which is crazy. It makes me feel like I haven't done anything with my life. But anyway, he saw Luke firing this rifle, made eye contact with Luke, and then ran and got his .45 caliber pistol out of his truck. He loaded his gun. He saw Luke coming out of the commons and he told him to freeze, and Luke ignored him and got in the car. And, as I said, he panicked. He was worried he was going to go to the elementary school where his son attended. So he did what he had to do to stop Luke. He ran to the road. Some reports say that he got in his car and he crashed his vehicle, that he got in his truck rather, and crashed his truck in to Luke's car to stop him. But I didn't see that reported as much as him going on foot. So I'm not sure exactly what happened there. But what I can say is that he was able to get ahead of Luke, stands in the middle of the road, and points a gun directly at his windshield. So Luke, as I said, didn't have a license. He wasn't an experienced driver. So he didn't realize that when he left the car, when he left his house with his mom's car that morning, the emergency brake was on the whole time. He literally left skid marks on the road from his house to the school. And this seems random to mention, but I mention this because it's the emergency brake that made it so his car stopped. Because when he sees Joel, he swerves. He goes into the grass. He loses traction. slides to a stop right on the edge of the road. Once Joel got Luke out of the car and had him laying on the grass, once he was subdued, he asked him, like, why did you do this? And it's so weird, but he said that Luke responded like, oh, Mr. Merrick, it's me. I'm the kid that got you a discount on your pizza recently. And he was like, in his mind, I don't know what he was thinking. I wasn't there, but he didn't respond to that. And he just said then, like, why did you kill my kids? And that's when he responded, quote, well, Mr. Merrick, the world has wronged me and I couldn't take it anymore. And that's when Joel said to him, quote, you think the world has wronged you? Wait till you get to Parchment, which I already mentioned that Parchment is a Mississippi state prison. So within no time, the police were there and Luke was arrested and they found several unused bullets in the pocket of his jacket, which just goes to show how much more horrific this could have been. I mean, his gun did jam, so this only lasted 10 minutes. And I say only 10 minutes, but I'm sure it had to have felt, those 10 minutes had to have felt like an eternity for those who were there. And man, I can't even imagine the aftermath in this situation, because as soon as the news got hold of the fact that there was an active shooter, it was all over the TV. Like, everybody knew about it, and parents were rushing over and like crowding outside the school to find out if their kids were one of the kids that got shot. Everybody was panicking. Everybody was like, is that my kid? Like, did something happen? And what breaks my heart, it gives me chills throughout my whole body, is that one of the parents who was there trying to get information on her kid was Lydia Dew's mom. And Joel saw her, was like looking out in the crowd of parents, saw her and went and got her and took her into the school to be with her daughter. So Luke was taken to the police station, and it was while he was being booked on the school shooting situation that one of the officers noticed this large cut on his palm, and they asked him, like, what happened there? And so he paused. He waited a little bit of time, and then he proudly said that he got it from killing his mother. So obviously police headed over, and they found Mary Ann dead in her one-story ranch-style home. Once in custody, Luke was taken to be questioned, and this was recorded, and you see that this 16-year-old boy who's barefoot, wearing a black shirt and dark pants, was read his Miranda rights, and then he gave a full confession. Well, a full confession. He leaves some things out. But this is a confession that later his defense attorney tried to tear apart, saying of it, quote, put 3 police officers in a dark room with a 16-year-old, and you could probably get him to say he was on the grassy knoll in 1963. But Luke did confess, and the first thing he did was sit down and tell them about the murder of his mother, though he didn't tell them everything. He definitely left out some of the more intense, more violent parts. Like, I mean, stabbing's pretty violent, but he left out the parts with the baseball bat, which something about that really just absolutely destroys me. And when he talked about killing his mother, he got very emotional. And he said while he cried, quote, she always never loved me. She always told me I wouldn't amount to anything. She always told me that I was fat and stupid and lazy. But then he said that he didn't want to kill his mother, that he loved her, that he just wanted revenge on Christina, and the only way he thought he could get that revenge was to kill his mom so that he could take her car. And when the cop that's interviewing him was like, well, ideas, thoughts, why didn't you, Luke, just tie her up? And he was just basically like, oh, like that idea didn't present itself to me. And I truly call bullshit on this, especially since we know that the night before he did this, he called a friend and said he was going to do it. You know what I mean? So I call bullshit on that he didn't think about it, that he didn't like weigh his options, or that he didn't want to do it because like he planned to do it for quite some time. But to pivot back to talking about Christina, he immediately got choked up when he was talking about her. He said that following their breakup, Christina just moved on too quickly for him. She was flirting with other guys and would sometimes even tell him, her friend, about boys that she was interested in, boys that she thought were cute. And he said that it just like destroyed him because he loved her and she didn't seem to care. Now, there was a lot to this confession, and you can actually watch it online. I found a copy of it on, like a recording of it on YouTube. And something that was notable about this confession is that Luke says, like, he knew what he was doing. He said that he was aware what he was doing. He was just pissed off at the time. And actually, one thing he said, where he said very excitedly, was, quote, I guess the world's going to remember me now. I'm probably going to get pretty famous. So with that, he was arrested and he was charged as an adult with 3 counts of murder and 7 counts of aggravated assault. And he was held without bail. And he was actually put on suicide watch despite saying that everything that happened was God's plan, which I found to be confusing because I was like, I thought it was Satan's plan. But, who am I to try to understand the mind of this young man? Now, the response to the shooting was obviously very intense, right? The school was closed almost immediately. I think it stayed closed for a week, though the parents did end up being supportive of it opening back up because they didn't want what happened here to destroy the legacy of the school and destroy the kids' education and things like that. And grief counselors were brought in for the students and the faculty because it had to have been incredibly traumatic to go through something like this. I honestly can't even imagine it. I can't even imagine it. I know that it can weigh heavily on your body and on your mind, and it can just be so much. And I feel so badly for anyone who is put into a position like that. I can't imagine it. And for all these kids, it's so fucked up. And they built a memorial outside the school, obviously, for the kids that were shot with flowers and messages of hope. Though there was one message left there that was not a message of hope. It was really, I don't know if it was a prank. I don't know what it was exactly, but it was this letter that was left there that was burned around the edges. And it said, quote, "Luke is God, from your friends at Pearl High School." Which, that note definitely made people uncomfortable. It made people scared. And that's because within no time after Luke was arrested, the Satanism aspect of this case was released by the media, and the words of internal turmoil. That's hard. Internal turmoil from Luke was released. And that's because you may recall that prior to the shooting, Luke went up to his friend Justin Sledge and gave him his last will and testament, his manifesto, as you will. Well, Luke gave that note to Justin so he could give it to Grant. But Justin didn't give it to Grant. Instead, he went to the media. Reportedly, pretty quickly after the shooting, it might have even been the same day after the shooting. Don't quote me on that. I did not say, and I quote, but I think it might have been the same day. Justin sat down and he gave an exclusive interview. And you can find this online. I was able to find it online. I was able to watch it online. And something I noted when I watched it is that Justin was really giving Sebastian from Cruel Intentions in this interview, just in how he looked and how he dressed, which is neither here nor there, but it is something I noted. But anyways, he sits down, he gives this interview, and he tells the person interviewing him, the interviewer, if you will, cool. He tells them that Luke came up to him before the shooting and gave him this letter. And then he takes out the letter and he reads parts of it to the camera, to the audience, which would be, anybody watching. And I'm going to read you parts of what he said. He said that Luke wrote in part, and I quote, "I am not insane. I am angry. The world has shit on me for the final time. I am not spoiled or lazy, for murder is not weak and slow-witted. Murder is gutsy and daring. I killed because people like me are mistreated every day. I did this to show society. Push us and we will push back. I suffered all my life. No one ever truly loved me. No one ever truly cared about me. I only loved one thing in my whole life, and that was Christina Menefee. But she was torn away from me. I tried to save myself, but she never cared for me. As it turns out, she made fun of me behind my back while we were together. And all throughout my life, I was ridiculed, always beaten, always hated. Can you, society, truly blame me for what I do? Yes, you will. The ratings wouldn't be high enough if you didn't, and it would not make good gossip for the old ladies. But I shall tell you one thing. I am malicious because I am miserable. The world has beaten me. Wednesday 1st, 1997 shall go down in history as the day I fought back. Which is quite a lot. He said that he was the epitome of evil. He said he had no mercy for humanity. He said that's because they made him into what he was, that they tortured him until he snapped. And during this interview, Justin said that Luke was, quote, simply pushed to a pivotal point in his life in which the world has spit on him for the last time, and he was fixin' to spit back. This is what Justin was saying as he read this on air. And it's now online. Now, people definitely criticize Justin for going on air and reading this letter. And if you're wondering like why he did that, because people definitely were wondering why he did that instead of giving this manifesto / will to the police, he says that he tried. Even to this day, he says that he tried to give this to police. He says that when he was in the police station first being interviewed after the shooting, he tried to give it to them, but that they wouldn't take it, which does seem odd to me because it seems like exactly the type of thing that they would want to take, right? They're looking into why a school shooting happened and you're like, I have a letter that may or may not say exactly why it happened, and they wouldn't take it. It seems odd, but that's what he said. And he said that he went home and he thought about giving it to police again, but as he started kind of thinking about the case more thoroughly, or the situation more thoroughly, he thought that the police may mishandle the case. So instead he went to the media. And as an adult, he says that this is something that he regrets and he sees as like a huge mistake that he made. And, I think he was right. I think it was a big mistake, especially because at this time it really put a target on his back. People scrutinized everything that Justin did, from like a speech he gave at the memorial service after the fact, which arguably he may have said the wrong things, or rather maybe it was not the wrong thing to say, but it was definitely the wrong messenger. Like, for example, he said something along the lines of, like, if society does not change further, such violence will continue to occur. And I mean, like, yeah, coming from him, it's definitely wasn't something that was welcome, and it was taken more as a threat than, like, social criticism because it was coming from him. And on top of that, you remember how I told you somebody left that dark note at the memorial outside the school with the burned edges? Everyone thought Justin was the one who did this. There was a rumor that went around that Justin was the one that left it. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. One, he ends up getting arrested, which we're going to get into. We're just not quite there yet. And two, he helped put Luke's words out into the world for everybody to hear. The words from a kid who is clearly needing attention, even though he would deny wanting attention. And he actually wrote about this in his will / manifesto when he said, quote, "It was not a cry for attention. It was not a cry for help. It was a scream in sheer agony saying that if I can't pry your eyes open, if I can't do it through pacifism, if I can't show you through displaying of intelligence, then I will do it with a bullet." So when Luke was first arrested, the way he was portrayed to the media was really like a sad, abused boy. They said that he was picked on at school, he was psychologically abused at home, and he was a victim of society. And a lot of people in the beginning did believe that, a lot, but not all, because there were some people that notably were like, no, that's not the situation. And one of those people was actually the assistant principal, Joel. You remember the guy who stopped him from escaping? Well, he was like, listen, this is just not accurate. And the way you can see that this is not accurate is that one of the victims that he chose, one of the people that he killed, was the epitome of a picked on student. Joel said that Lydia Dew was an incredibly sweet girl, but that she suffered with social awkwardness and didn't have a lot of friends. He said it was to the point that he took like a special interest in her. He would see her and see how she interacted with her peers and thought that he needed to make sure she was okay. He would make a point to spend time with her and check in on her and make sure that she felt seen and special and important. And it really seemed to me that they had like a special sort of relationship, and it just could completely break your heart. But during Lydia's funeral, her mother gave Joel one of the rings that she would wear as a thank you for everything he did for her daughter. So Joel was saying that he did not see Luke as this abused, beaten down kid that the media was portraying. And within no time, the media did change their tune. They shifted perspective, which shifted the perspective from the public because they were now getting more information. And basically, he went from being seen as like this nerdy, abused kid to a hitman for Satan. There were news articles coming out where they were talking about Satan and spells and rituals and Hitler all in like the same article. And this was in the Bible Belt. So it definitely changed people's perspective on Luke, even though Luke's defense attorney said, quote, "For lack of a better word, he fits the nerd syndrome." And obviously when he said that, he was talking about Luke. So people were scared. People felt uncomfortable sending their kids back to school when there was still an active investigation going on. And the talk of Satan was making people very nervous. The parents of one girl who was present at the school but ended up getting away unharmed said of this quote, "It's the grip of evil is what it is. It's the grip of Satan. He's got a grip on the world like you wouldn't believe." And man, this mindset only got worse, okay? And that's because a week after Luke was arrested, 7 more kids were arrested in connection to the shooting. This was Grant, who we discussed, Justin, who we discussed, Donald, who was the kid who first brought Luke into the group of friends, and then several other kids that we haven't mentioned yet. This was a kid named Delbert, a kid named Lucas, and then another kid who was so young at the time. I don't know what the cutoff age was, but he was young enough that his name was never released to the public. It might be out there. I didn't dig into it, but his name wasn't released because his case was being handled in juvenile court. So just as people are getting over the shock of a 16-year-old being arrested for these murders, which murder in general in this area was shocking because prior to this, there hadn't been a murder in Pearl for, I think it was over 2 years. And now it was multiple murders committed by a kid. And now 7 more kids are being arrested in relation to this. And there's the talk of Hitler and Satan. It was so sensational and people were panicking. People were worried because there was rumors that there was a hit list out there. And the cops were getting called over and over from parents asking if their kid was on this hit list. So people were worried. They were worried, are there more kids that are related to this that you just haven't arrested yet? Are there still people in danger? People didn't know, and the police weren't really talking. All they told the media in the beginning, or the public in the beginning, is that while doing their grief counseling sessions, some kids said that Luke didn't act alone. And then after that, without any explanation, the cops started going into the school and pulling kids out of class to arrest them. So anyways, all these kids are arrested, and the majority of them were charged with conspiracy to commit murder and held on a $1 million bond. But I said some of the kids were charged with conspiracy. Some of them got more serious charges. For example, Grant and Justin were charged as accessories to murder before the fact, which is a serious felony. And one of the other kids, so Grant and Donald. Okay, so Grant's just very involved, or so he seems to be very involved. But Grant and Donald, I believe, were also charged with conspiracy to kill Donald's father. I guess Donald's dad was a firefighter, and Grant and Donald, according to the affidavit, were planning to rub the doorknobs of the home with a fat soluble poison and kill him. And the reason they were doing this is because there was some dispute between the boys and him over buying a computer with his credit card, which seems very dramatic, but basically the sort of mantra of this group of kids was, quote, "We cannot move forward until all of our enemies are gone." Now, Donald's father did not believe that his son was serious about wanting to hurt him. He didn't believe that at all. And through Donald Jr., because it's Donald Jr., Donald Sr., through Donald Jr.'s attorney, after, they're being charged with this serious crime, his attorney came out and said that Donald was completely innocent and that his father fully supported him. Now, Donald Sr., other family members, and the defense attorneys basically said that the police were overreacting, that they were being dramatic, that the kids weren't serious when they were talking about things like this, that kids talk and they talk a lot. But they said that none of these kids were actually planning a murder. They were just being big and bad and saying things that were stupid. And these were the type of kids that literally played role-playing games. And none of them thought that Luke was in the mindset of somebody who would actually do something like this. They thought it was all talk, with one mother of one of the boys even saying, my kid was friends with these kids that were shot. He's devastated by this. And, it did seem like the parents and the defense attorneys may have had a leg to stand on here. You'll have to tell me what you think, if there are more of these kids that were more involved than they were, You'll have to let me know what you think, because some people think that more kids should have been charged or rather convicted, and some are like, no, they were just talking. You'll have to let me know if you think these kids knew that Grant was serious and that they just didn't say anything. But within no time, so they're arrested. They're held on $1 million bond. Their bonds started getting dropped, and within no time, they all started getting released because the DA said that the conspiracy charges would be too difficult to prove. So within no time, these kids were out, and they started cooperating with police and giving them information on both Luke and Grant. Grant ended up being the only one of these kids that wasn't released and was, spoiler alert, eventually convicted of something, but we'll get into what happens to him a little bit later. First, I want to talk about Luke, and truthfully, Grant comes up quite a bit at Luke's trial, or rather trials, because Luke did end up having 2 separate trials, one for the murder of his mother and one for the murders of Christina and Lydia at Pearl High School. Now, both trials were moved out of Pearl because there was a significant amount of pretrial publicity, obviously. And the trial for his mother's murder was in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and the trial for the school shooting was held in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. and neither Luke's father or brother were going to attend his trials. They did not show up for him. And Luke was facing life in prison with no possibility of parole because he was not eligible for the death penalty, which was something that upset the DA. And they thought that this is the type of case that should change the law, basically, because in Mississippi at this time, in order for you to get the death penalty, your murder charges would have to be connected with another crime as well, like burglary or rape. Though it is worth mentioning, since these murders, the law has changed. And now you're eligible for the death penalty if you commit multiple murders, and you're also eligible for the death penalty if you commit a murder on school grounds, which is, great if you believe in the death penalty, I suppose. And the senator basically said that they thought that changing the law to this sent the right message. Anyways, let's start talking about the trials. And let's first talk about the trial for the murder of Mary Ann, Luke's mother. And we're going to talk about her trial first because her trial happened first. The prosecution opened their case with saying, and I quote, "The state contends beyond a reasonable doubt that Woodham did cold-bloodedly murder his mother that fateful morning." They added that Luke was mean, hateful, and bloodthirsty, and said that murder was on his mind. The defense basically had two main points that they were going to use to defend Luke. One was his mental health, which I think we could have seen coming from a mile away. They were basically saying that he wasn't responsible for the murders because he wasn't mentally capable of understanding how serious it was because he was mentally ill. And the other thing that they were saying is that in addition to him being mentally ill, he was persuaded and coerced into doing this by his friend Grant. So let's start with the mental health aspect. Basically, there was a forensic psychologist that testified for the defense and said that Luke was paranoid and out of touch when he murdered his mother. And he also said that Luke saw red-cloaked demons with glowing eyes that told him to kill. He said that he saw these demons with their glowing eyes several times and that they would speak to him in his brain, right? And tell him things that they wanted him to do, and more specifically, people they wanted him to kill. After conducting a series of tests, the psychologist determined that Luke had problems with both, quote, perceptual accuracy and reality, and suggested that the test results indicated somebody with borderline personality disorder. The doctor also said that it was his opinion that Luke, who was described as a, quote, very psychologically disturbed youngster, was exploited by Grant, which left his reality distorted and made him, quote, helpless to judge the appropriateness of his behaviors. A doctor for the prosecution did also testify, right? Doctor on one side, doctor on the other side. And this doctor said that though he did see that Luke had some behavioral issues, he did not agree that Luke had borderline personality disorder, and rather believed that Luke had narcissistic traits because he believed that he was smarter and better than everyone else. And he said of this quote, he's not right. He's not normal. He has problems, but he is not so ill that, in my opinion, he has any major mental disorders. So Luke was put on the stand, and when he testified, he said through tears that he did not remember murdering his mother. He said he woke up that morning and he was taunted by demons, and he said he remembered grabbing a pillow, a knife, and a bat and heading towards his mother's room, all while he heard the voice of Grant in his head. He said specifically of this, quote, "I just closed my eyes and I fought with myself because I didn't want to do any of it. When I opened my eyes, my mother was lying in her bed, dead." At this point, he started crying very hard, and his attorney had to help him get it together and tell him I need you to stop crying for me. And Luke just said that he was trying. And then he said that he didn't want to kill his mother. He just wanted her to understand. During cross-examination, the prosecutor got pretty aggressive with Luke and ended up getting to the point where he just straight up told him, you make me sick. And in response, Luke had an outburst where he said, you've never walked a mile in my shoes. You can't judge me. To which I'm kind of I don't know. I feel like when you do something like this, people can judge you. Is it right? I don't know, but it seems like you've opened yourself up to that. So the next part of Luke's defense was that Grant had convinced him to murder his mother, and the defense basically said that Luke was a mentally ill child, and Grant preyed on that. They said from the moment that Grant came into Luke's life, he spiraled out of control. His life spiraled out of control. They basically said that what Grant said went. He was the one calling the shots. He was the one making Luke a violent person. And then they said that Grant was the one who killed Sparkles. And this is going to seem like it's coming out of nowhere. I didn't even know if I wanted to talk about it, but I feel like I have to talk about it when you talk about this case. And I'm going to give you a trigger warning now because I'm going to be describing something that's super fucked up and involves an animal. Basically, Luke kept a diary. And 6 months prior to the murders, Luke wrote in his diary that he had made his first kill and that his first kill was a loved one. And then he went on to write in great detail about how he and an accomplice murdered his pet dog, Sparkles. And, they're now saying that this accomplice was Grant. So Sparkles was a Shih Tzu, the same Shih Tzu that we discussed in the beginning, the same dog that Luke would worry about in the summer, worrying that she needed a haircut or that she needed more water because it was too hot. Well, Luke and his accomplice took this dog to the woods, put it in a book bag, and then started to beat the dog inside the bag. And when she screamed in agony because she was being beaten, this dog, they said that it sounded almost human. They found it funny and they chose to beat it harder. They then broke Sparkle's bones before lighting her and the bag on fire and letting it burn for a while before finally throwing it into a pond and letting it sink to the bottom. And in his diary, Luke wrote of this experience, quote, "I'll never forget the sound of her breaking under my might. I hit her so hard, I knocked the fur off her neck. It was true beauty." So that is maddening. It's so fucked up. It's the type of thing that I don't even have words for. You guys know how much I love animals, and he did something so fucked up. And this wasn't the first time he abused this dog, because there was a neighbor who came forward and said that in April, I think it was, of 1997, they had looked out and saw Luke in his yard beating this dog with a stick until it couldn't walk. Why this neighbor didn't do anything, I don't know. And later the attorney for, I think it was for Luke, was like, I don't think this really happened. It didn't come forward. They just want to be part of this case now. But either way, it's maddening. And Luke is saying that he did this with Grant. And Sparkles wasn't even the only loved one in Luke's life that the defense tried to imply that Grant may have been involved in hurting. They literally tried to say that Grant may have been in the home with Luke at the time that Mary Ann was killed. And this is because a hair follicle was found in blood on the wall, I believe it was, of Mary Ann's bedroom. And when they looked at this hair follicle, it couldn't be linked to Luke or Mary Ann. So they were trying to imply that it could be linked to Grant, though I don't think it was actually linked to Grant. This is what they were trying to do on the stand, though. They even put a detective on the stand and straight up asked him, like, did you ever think that Grant might have been involved in the murder of Mary Ann? Did you think it was possible that he was there when this happened? And the cop straight up said yes. But this detective also testified that in talking to Luke, he believed that Luke was in complete control of his actions, and said that when Luke gave his confession, he never mentioned Grant, despite the fact that now he was saying that the only reason he gave this confession when he didn't remember killing his mother is because Grant told him to, and that he said what Grant told him to say. So the jury was sent to deliberate, and after 3 hours, they returned with their verdict. And what's super eerie here is that when this was happening, there was a really bad storm in the area. So the electricity ended up being cut off in the courthouse. So when the verdict was to be read, it was dark in that room, but they proceeded anyway. The jury stared at Luke, and some of them cried as the verdict was read. But they had found Luke Woodham guilty of the murder of his mother, and he was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole till he's 65 years old. He was then led out of the courtroom to a sea of reporters, and one reporter asked Luke a question when he said, quote, "Heaven or hell, where are you going now?" And Luke responded saying, and I quote, "I'm going to heaven now. This is God's will. God bless you all." So now we'll move on to the second trial. And before the second trial even began, the defense attorney was like, listen, to the prosecution, like, listen, we can just stipulate to what happened the day of the shooting to limit the emotional testimony needed at trial, which basically, from what I understand, because I've written stipulations, but it was not for criminal cases like this. And a stipulation, at least in the ones that I've done, are basically in writing. It's just in writing. Basically what they would do is they would put in writing what had happened at the school. Both attorneys would agree to it, both sides would agree to it, and that would make it so that people who were there at the time of the shooting wouldn't have to get up and testify about what they saw because it was already stipulated and on record what happened. But when the defense offered this, the prosecution was like, no, because they knew that they had over a dozen people, a dozen students and faculty members who were there at the time that the shooting took place, and that their testimony would be more emotionally impactful for the jury than a stipulation would, obviously. But nice try. It was a good shot. You tried. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So the defense opened their case with saying that, again, Luke was not guilty by reason of insanity. They said that he was not a normal thinking person and was suffering from a, quote, defect of reason. But of course, the prosecution disagreed when they said, quote, the defense will try to tell you he was a poor, picked on little kid. The state will show you that that was not the truth. He was not picked on. He was just like everybody else at that school. Which I don't know if I totally agree with, because I do actually think he was probably bullied. I do. But that's not an excuse. During this trial, students had to be re-traumatized as they sat and told the court about the things they heard that day and the things they saw that day. And while this testimony was happening, Luke sat forward in his seat and really paid attention as these kids broke down and cried and talked about how what happened that day affected them, not just in that moment, but in their lives after the fact. One girl named Brooke, who was friends with Christina, described how she felt in that moment when the shooting first started, when she said, quote, I basically shut down. I quit eating. I started crying. All I wanted to do was find Christy. The same doctor who testified in Mary Ann's murder trial testified for the defense in the shooting case and stated that Luke displayed, quote, psychotic processing and had perception and judgment problems and had a borderline personality disorder, and said that when the shooting occurred, Luke could not fathom the consequences of his actions. And after the psychologist testified, Luke actually got on the stand, this time against the recommendation of his attorney. I'm assuming that it didn't go well or didn't go the way that he hoped it would at Mary Ann's trial, and thought that putting him on the stand now would hurt more than it helped. But still, he got up on the stand and he rambled. He talked about his home life, about his parents separating, about how he was an outcast at school, and about how the first acceptance he ever felt like he had was from Christina. He said that when the two broke up, he was devastated, and he started to cry when he said, quote, I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, I didn't want to live. It destroyed me. He said when he met and befriended Grant, he learned about Satanism, and it felt like it gave him power over many things. He added that Grant had told him that he, Luke, had the potential for great things, and had even told him that he would help him get Christina back through the use of the occult. And Luke said that he believed him. He believed that this was true. He believed that the magic could work because he had seen it firsthand when he and Grant had cast a spell and had caused another student to be hit by a car and die. Which, this is a whole thing, and I'm not going to get into all of the specifics, but basically, Grant and Luke wanted to put a spell on one particular kid. So they break out the Book of the Dead, oh God, I forgot the name already. The Book of the Dead. They bust it out and they start doing this particular spell. And while they're doing this spell, you're supposed to think of the kid, the person that you want to die. And Luke said he thought about the wrong kid, which big fuck up when you're messing with something like this, if you believe that it's true, right? So he thinks about the wrong kid. They finish the spell. The next day, I believe it was, Luke's at home. He's watching SNL. As many people do. He's watching SNL when he gets a knock on the door. And it's a friend telling him that the exact kid that he thought of when they were doing that spell was dead. This friend told him that this kid was walking across the street, got hit by a car, and died. And this right here was a defining moment for Luke. It made him see the world in a totally different way. And Luke said specifically of this magic, and I quote, 1 second I was some kind of heartbroken idiot, and the next second I had power over many things. My mind didn't know how to take it. He added that he felt like he had complete control and complete power over many different things, and said that he knew it was real despite what other people may think. Which, this was quite a departure from what he had said previously, where he said that he was so sorry for what he did and he wasn't in control. The prosecution rested their case by showing the jury, showing the court, a video of Luke's confession where he said that he was angry and he snapped and he went into the commons area and he just started firing at people at random. And on the tape, Luke said specifically, and I quote, I knew what I was doing. I was just pissed at the time. The jury was sent to deliberate, and when they returned with their verdict, they had found Luke Woodham guilty. He was guilty of 2 counts of murder and 7 counts of aggravated assault, and he was given 2 consecutive life sentences for the murders and 7 sentences of 20 years each for the aggravated assaults. And after the sentence was read, Luke made a statement to the court where he said, quote, "I am sorry for the people I hurt and killed. The reason you see no tears is because I have been forgiven by God." But this didn't seem to touch the hearts of those he affected as much as he believes his heart was touched by God, because Christina's grandmother said that he was a genetic waste, which genetic waste is such a hard insult, and I love it very much. So now let's wrap this up with Grant, because as we know, he was one of the Croth kids that didn't have the charges against him dropped. He was also the subject of both trials, with them saying that he orchestrated with Luke and manipulated and controlled Luke to get him to commit these murders. And speaking of which, he was released on bail. I didn't mention this because I just forgot and just remembered now. So he was released on bail, and for Luke's trials, he was subpoenaed to come and testify, but he didn't because he didn't want to incriminate himself, and legally he didn't have to. And this wasn't the only trial that Luke didn't end up going to, because Luke didn't end up going to trial for his accessory charges either. He was offered a plea deal and he took it. He ended up pleading guilty to the lesser charge of conspiracy and was sentenced to 6 months of prison-based boot camp, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. Some people do see this as a mistake. The daughter of the bus driver, you remember the bus driver that Luke would sit on the bus and talk to about, Gilligan's Island and his dog? Well, the daughter of this bus driver thinks it was a huge mistake and thinks that Grant had much more involvement than his sentence would reflect. She said that yes, he was a smart, church-oriented kid, but he was also the type of kid who would get caught drawing Nazi symbols and was maniacal. To her, Grant was someone who had influence in Luke's life, somebody older, somebody that he looked up to. And she believed that Luke wanted to be friends with Grant so badly and wanted to hold on to him so hard that he would do anything, even if that meant committing murder. Now, does that mean that Luke's not responsible? No, I don't think so. But to her and to many others, Grant is also a villain. And with that, my friends, is the story of the crimes that were committed by Luke Woodham. I hope that you found this to be informative. I hope I gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Christina, Lydia, and Mary Ann with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. Do you think, there were 2, actually, do you think that Grant should have been given more time? Do you think that his sentence reflects his involvement in these murders? And 2, do you think any of the other kids that were released were more involved, but the police were just not able to solve it? Do you think that Luke acted alone, or do you think that more of these kids knew and just didn't say anything? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. I am curious to hear what you say. Anyways, guys, before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with whatever case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, and whenever you leave a comment with a suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it. So if I do cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest, because they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage. And I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing, ringing the bell, commenting down below, and introducing yourself. I put out new videos every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. And now, with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. I hope I get to see you in my next video. And in the meantime, take care of yourself.